I really think that it's an anxiety disorder. I think it's like agoraphobia. I think there's a addiction aspect to it. When people are hoarders and they collect, they get a big dopamine hit. So, I think that, and that what they've found is people who have most likely some genetic tendency towards that, emotional traumas will kick it off.
I'd like to welcome the show, Tracy McCubbin. How you doing, Tracy?
I'm good, Alex. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We are going to discuss a problem I think society has, but really the Western world, specifically America, has in regards to clutter, stuff, accumulating stuff. It is because we're such a consumer-based culture that is constantly having to buy. And the stuff is sometimes even suffocating us to death, literally, not even figuratively, but literally suffocating us to death, and trying to find happiness within stuff. And we'll get into all of that. But I want to ask you first, how did you get interested in decluttering people's lives? I'm assuming you had something to declutter in your life before you started helping others. I'm assuming.
Yeah, it's a little bit more circuitous than that, but I was a personal assistant for 10 years. So I worked for two different people, and my job was just solving problems. And the last person I worked for was a television director. And when he would go on hiatus, friends would call me, or friends of his, or just, I had an accounting background, and I helped my grandmother, and I kind of done a lot of sort of administrative odd jobs. So people would call me and say, "Oh, my business went out of business and I've got all the paperwork left. And do you have a couple hours you could come and help me?" And so it started rolling, and more people told more people. And one day a friend of mine was like, "I think you have a business." And I was like, "What? No, I'm just helping people out." And he's like, "No, that's actually a business. Helping people is a business." Right. So I came up with a name and opened a website, and that was 14 years ago, and thousands of clients later. And it just really took off. And the component that I never connected in the beginning, I'm the child of a hoarder. So I grew up with a father who was a hoarder, and I saw through my whole life his struggle with his relationship to stuff. And then I also grew up with, my grandmother was a Depression era baby and an immigrant. So I just saw the complicated relationship. And I think that it gave me a lot of empathy. And it wasn't until I had a client who was a Jungian psychiatrist, and he was like, "You took your psychic wound and made it your business." And I was like, "I did." So I sort of gave myself a little bit of opportunity to heal, and then walked into it with a real compassion and understanding that for a lot of people, that relationship is very fraught and very difficult. And so my whole goal is, not only to help you get organized, but to also change that relationship.
It's fascinating because, I just moved to Austin, and everywhere I drive, all I see is storage facilities. And I'm not talking about, this is Texas size storage facilities. I mean, massive complexes of storage.
And if you think about those units are averaging about $300 to $400 a month, and there's probably 1,000 in each one.
I mean, it's great business. I mean, if you could own a storage unit business, it's good business, but I can't myself personally feed into that. But I understand. I mean, if you're in the storage unit business, business is booming, unfortunately. But the thing is, completely unfortunately. But the thing is that I see, I've never gotten to the place, my own personal experience with, I wouldn't say hoarding, collecting. I was a collector. I collected baseball cards and comic books and toys and things like that throughout my life. I was a collector and held on to things I probably shouldn't have carried along with me. But I never got to the place where I needed to get a storage unit ever. And I didn't live in huge houses that I stored up. So I never really had a major issue with it. But as I've gotten older, I've realized, because only time shows you this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it too. Only time shows you that I haven't touched that in 5 years. I haven't even looked at that in 10 years. And I think it came to a head for me right prior to the pandemic. I'd been a comic book collector since I was a kid, and I had a comic book business for a while when I was in my 20s. So I had about 10 to 12 long boxes. I don't know if you ever know what a long box is.
Oh, I know exactly what they are.
So the long box of comic books, and it's a fairly valuable collection. But I hadn't collected comic books since my daughters were born, like physically gone to a comic book show or something and bought a comic book. It was just sitting there. And I was just like, and every time I move, I'd have to lug hundreds of pounds of comic books and then shove them in a closet somewhere and take care of them. And it was just such a big deal. And I just finally came to the decision. I was like, you know what? Let me take 20 of my favorite books that have some sort of emotional attachment. Like I remember when I bought them, or they're super valuable. And let me put those up as kind of like a safe, like an investment. Mm-hmm. But the rest of the 10 boxes, let me sell. And I was lucky enough to be able to sell it prior to the pandemic and got a nice chunk of cash out of it. And I felt so much lighter, and I wasn't emotionally attached to it. For a long time, I was emotionally attached to it. But I let go of it. And that taught me a huge lesson about like when we moved from Los Angeles to Austin, I just got rid of. I mean, our new house, there's empty, like all there was is closets in our new house, and they're empty. They're like literally empty. There's just nothing there. And my wife and I both are in the same place. It was like, we don't need more stuff. And I always love using this analogy. I've never seen a U-Haul attached to a hearse.
Yeah, it's one of my, I've never seen anybody drive into the cemetery in a U-Haul. Like, right. I think it's amazing. I mean, that whole story is so illustrative of so many things. And I'm going to just start by saying this because storage units are activating for people, but sure. Having been in hundreds, I'm not exaggerating. I've been in hundreds of people's storage units. I have never been in a storage unit where the things inside the storage unit are worth more than what someone's paid to store them. Never.
It's in a practical or an intellectual way. You're like, well, I'm storing millions of dollars of art in my storage unit. Sure, somebody does. I'm sure somebody is storing.
No, but they don't. But if somebody has millions of dollars, and I deal with $1 million art collections, they're in art storage in climate control. Like that's a whole different thing.
That's a different conversation.
Yeah. If you have things in a public storage 5 miles away, if you need one of those things, you can't just get it. Like, you know, that's what I say to people. They're like, well, I might need it, but you're not going to go get it. You're going to forget it's in there. It's really truly a waste of money. And then I sort of invite people to say like, why are you hanging on to it? Like, oh, well, I might need it. Well, but let's do the math of that. If you might need it, wouldn't it be cheaper maybe to just buy it again? Right? Like what's the suck? Yeah, than to keep paying for it, because there's a cycle. This is the thing. And this is such an interesting thing that you said about your comic books is that clutter has an ongoing cost. It's like, oh, I bought this comic book and that's the end. No, you have to store it. You have to make sure it doesn't get damaged. You have to pay to move it. That's weight. Like there's an ongoing cost to clutter. And if you have parts of your house that you can't use because they're your storage depots, you're paying for that. You're paying a mortgage, you're paying a rent, you're not able to use your home. So I'm always inviting people to look at the ongoing cost of their clutter, right? What does it cost to maintain it? What does it cost to store it? What does it cost to have someone haul it away? So before you bring something new into your life, look at the ongoing cost, because there's a real monetary cost and then there's an emotional cost.
And I wanted to talk to you about emotions, because we attach so much emotion to things, to stuff. And again, I'll use my example of my comic books. I mean, I remember lugging them when I was, 10 or 12, literally lugging them around in a cart. 2 or 3 long boxes I would take to my father's house for the weekend, because my parents were divorced. So I would go and I would just study, and organize and tweak and everything like that. And there was such an emotional attachment that I had to them. But as time went on, I'm like, well, I've kind of outgrown that. And even the 10 or 20 comic books I've kept in a shoebox somewhere now, they're valuable comic books. They're an actual investment. And that's different. And just a small little thing that I've kept. I'm like, these in 20 years, these are probably going to be worth a lot more than they are right now. So I'm going to keep them. But I don't have thousands anymore.
But it's so interesting that, grew up in a divorced home too. So I understood the going back from the weekend. And so
Sure.
when you tell me that story, what I think is those comic books serves you really well during that time. Like I would always take a bunch of books because I was like, I didn't know what crazy girlfriend my dad was going to have, or, I always had a book to like bury it was something to do. And it was something to make me feel safe and a little bit of my other house. So, those comic books during that time in your life served a purpose. They brought you happiness. They gave, and then as life went on and you had twins and you're like, oh yeah, these actually aren't serving me anymore. And I think that's what people need to understand too about their homes and clutter. Like, is your clutter serving you? Is it making your life better? Is it making you happier? Is it making you feel lighter? Like what's it doing there or is it draining you? Right? Is it sucking from you?
Yeah, generally, I mean that old saying that the things you own eventually own you, and it's extremely true because you have to carry it, you have to take care of it, you got to pay to move it, you got to do, and it's never more clear than when you move. Because if you're in a place for 20 or 30 years, you just start accumulating stuff and you forget about it. But the second you got to clean out the house to move it, you're just like, oh my God, look at all this stuff that we're just throwing money being tossed out the window.
Well, and also when you get the quote from the movers by weight, and they're like, okay, that's $15,000 to move you. And you're like, wait, what? And you're like, oh, right. Do I need to take all this stuff? Like, you really
start paring down, like, what do I absolutely need? And when you start figuring out what you absolutely need to function in life, as far as wardrobes are concerned, wardrobes are a very amazing place for clutter because you'll just hold on to things for decades. Sometimes they're like, it'll be in fashion. Yeah, in 30 years. Do you really need to just buy a new one at that point?
I had this lovely clients. It was a young couple. They were about to have their first baby and they lived in a very small space. And it was challenging to find room for the baby. And, he was a firefighter and this is what they were saving up to buy a home. And it's like, we can make it work. And he had a whole closet. He had a lot of clothes and we were like, this has really got to be the closet for the baby stuff. And he's like, I can't get rid of those clothes. I'm going to wear them again, blah, blah, blah. And in there were a bunch of pairs of, do you remember dolphin shorts?
Oh yeah.
They were like that. Yeah. So he had a bunch of those and I was like, all right, I'll tell you what, if you can put those dolphin shorts on right now, go to Starbucks, get us drinks, come back still in those dolphin shorts. I'll let you keep them. And he was like, of course. And he put them on, he went out the door, he turned around and he's like, I'm never going to wear these again. I was like,
so at a certain point, you're like, how many shirts do you wear? If you haven't touched them in 90 days, you're probably not going to touch them.
Exactly.
I mean, winter clothes are winter clothes and you put those away for the winter. That's fine. Because I have winter clothes, but at a certain point, you just like, how much do you really need? And when you start thinking about these kind of things, it starts really you start paring things down. And again, this is age. I mean, after years of just studying your own life, if you're able to have a perspective on your own life, because many people don't go through their life analyzing themselves and they'll go through their entire life just hoarding. But if you're able to look and just like, what do I really need in life? And how much money am I spending and all this kind of stuff? But I want to ask you this question because you said your father was a hoarder. I've watched 1 or 2 episodes of Hoarders and I can't. I just can't. It's just too depressing. It's too depressing. I sat and watched it with my wife one day. She's like, why are we, this is just so, I can't. And I've been like, I had a neighbor who was a hoarder. And one day I walked into their house. They're like, hey, do you want to pick some stuff up that we're getting rid of? And we're like, yeah, sure. This is 25 years ago. And I walked in, I'm like, oh my God, now I know where all the roaches are coming from. Like it was, it was disgusting. They had 45 cats. It was like, it was horrible. What causes somebody emotionally to do that? Because there's something obviously emotionally wrong. There's some trauma that they have caused to take that place. So can you kind of deconstruct that a little bit for the listeners?
Yeah, this is great. And I love to talk about this. So for a long time, the psychiatric community, said that hoarding was a symptom of obsessive compulsive disorder. But in recent years, they've realized, oh no, it's a standalone disorder. It is a mental disorder. I really think that it's an anxiety disorder. I think it's like agoraphobia. I think there's a addiction aspect to it. When people are hoarders and they collect, they get a big dopamine hit. So, I think that, and that what they found is people who have most likely some genetic tendency towards that, emotional traumas will kick it off. So for my dad, it was divorce from my mom, and then it was a girlfriend breaking up with him. So we could archaeologically sort of see when these traumas happened. And, the thing that's so interesting is that there is a lot of help for it. They found that cognitive behavior therapy is very successful, that it's a little bit of a rewiring of the brain as opposed to like digging deep. But I think people on the outside, especially family members, are like, well, just throw it all away. It's like telling an alcoholic, well, just don't have a drink. Just moderate your drinking.
Just stop.
Yeah, just stop.
Just stop.
Have one beer. Yeah. So
right.
It's very,
just have the one. Just have one.
I can have one. Why can't you have one? And so I think that they don't get a lot of compassion and a lot of understanding. And interestingly, hoarders tend to be very, very smart people, and they're very wily, so they can kind of argue their way out of anything. So it's really difficult. There's an amazing book, and I'll send you the link and you can put it in the show notes, but it's called Buried in Treasures by Dr. David Tolan. And it's one of the best books about hoarding I've ever read. It's written very in layman's terms, and it's for people who have it or with someone they love has it. And if you're dealing, I just say to the listeners, if you're dealing with this or worried about it, pick this book up, because it's a great read and it will be so illuminating.
So the difference between, the cases in hoarders, which is basically living in filth and piles of stuff, versus a collector who might also be hoarding, but in an organized fashion, where his comic books are all organized and his baseball cards and maybe his toy collection. But there's a problem because they don't stop collecting and it just keeps going. So those are two very different.
Yeah. Hoarding disorder and collecting are very different. And one of the kind of ways to sort of go like, is this hoard, is like, are there rooms in your house that you can't use as they're intended? Like, is the bathroom so full of comic books that you can't use it as a bathroom anymore? So that, there's also a test, and I think you can find it pretty easily online that you can take. But, for me, I work with some hoarders. I don't work with a ton. There's a lot of complications and there's a lot of things, but, I really like to kind of address just all of us dealing with our everyday clutter, where it's so easy to consume. It's, I joke, it's like, you don't even, shopping used to be an expedition, right? You'd go to the store and buy clothes and try it on. It's now like, you don't even have to put pants on. You can just order whatever you want. So our consuming has gotten out of control.
Without question. And do you think that, like, I've had family members who fell in sort of a comfort zone with shopping and consuming and constantly buying things that they'll wear once, some never wear at all. It's kind of like a dopamine hit, but there is an emotional attachment. It's an emotional based problem. Is there a way that you can suggest or any advice on if someone's looking at themselves to kind of pinpoint why I need to buy, I need to consume, I need to get that new dress, I need to get that new comic book, for lack of a better term?
Well, this is fantastic. You just handed it to me on a platter. So my first book, Making Space Clutter-Free, is about why we can't declutter, the blocks that we have around decluttering. But my second book is coming out in October, and it's called Make Space for Happiness. And it's all about why we shop. It's basically the 7 emotional kind of, I don't want to say holes, but the like things that are missing inside of us that we think shopping is going to fill. So there's a lot of reasons. I mean, the dopamine hit is one, like yay, someone bought me a present. Like the Amazon person shows up and you're like, I got a present. No, you bought that.
I got to say, when Amazon does show up, there is a little bit of a dopamine hit, even though if I know it's just detergent. Yeah. I'm like, it's weird. It's weird.
It's really weird. They've done a ton of studies of it, and Amazon is designed that way. And there's a reason that Amazon hired a whole bunch of slot machine designers to design the site. There's a lot. They're playing into all that stuff. So, it's really, for me, clutter and stuff and accumulating, it's all emotional. It's all emotional.
So what are a few of these emotional clutter blocks?
Yeah, they're fantastic. So let's talk about clutter block number 2, because this goes into shopping. It's my stuff tells me who I am. So this is someone who identity is wrapped around shopping. We know these people, right? Oh my God, I got this on sale. Look I got such a bargain. These were really $500 and I got them for $300. I saved $200. You're like, well, no, you spent $300. You still spent $300. So it's people whose identity is wrapped up in acquiring, in labels, that they, for some reason, don't feel like they're just enough. Which they are,
but that's basically, most of the Western world is attached to labels and brands that make no sense. Just because you have a Nike brand on doesn't make you LeBron James. That's not. No,
and that okay, yeah, and that really came that dovetailed with cheap consumer goods. As soon as the U.S. stopped making things and sent it overseas to be made, and prices dropped of consumer goods, Madison Avenue, to talk about the advertising world, figured out, if we slap a label on this and we market it so that people want that label, then, it ceases to be about the quality of the product. And we're all looking for purpose, or, I'm okay. Tell me I'm okay. Will this label, this big Gucci label, tell me I'm okay? And
if you can go deeper into more of a psychological breakdown of why we need those kind of labels and that kind of attention and validation of who we are, because we're not finding that within ourselves. We're looking for it outside of ourselves. And that's what all this is in many ways, right?
Yeah, and I think what was interesting about the pandemic, especially in regards to shopping, is I think 2 things. One, we felt so out of control that it's like, well, if I can find just the right hand sanitizer, I won't get sick. And just the right
toilet
mask.
Paper.
Toilet paper, that. And then also our social interaction was just taken away. I remember saying to my fiance one day, I just want to meet a girlfriend for lunch in cute sandals. I have a bunch of stuff I need to talk about. And he's like, well, we can talk. I'm like, not to you.
I'm talking about you to her.
I don't want to say, I remember one day in the height of it, Zooming, FaceTiming with my best friend on a car, pulled by his car side of a street. I just need to talk to you. And so I think so much of that was gone. It was like, well, let's just shop. I've got, this will fulfill me. And, and I'm not a minimalist, and I'm definitely not I think that experiment of not buying anything for 30 days is interesting. It's not how I live, but I want people to have an awareness. It's all an awareness, right? It's one of the first things I tell people is, they'll say to me, oh, I need a new pair of jeans. As I'm standing in their closet and they have 20 pairs of jeans. I'm like, because you're a rancher? You need 30 pairs of jeans
because the cattle are going to ruin the first 19.
Yeah, exactly. And then I just say hey, let's just swap need for want. I want a new pair of jeans. Great. You want a new pair of jeans. That's a very different point of view to come from. And that's okay. And sometimes when you acknowledge that it's just a want, you kind of don't want it anymore.
Right. And it was really interesting in your book. You have a section about Sex in the City. And which was great, because I've had that revelation, not to that extent, of course, but she realized that her 400 or 500 pairs of Milano, the heels that were $400 each, were basically a down payment on an apartment. And it's kind of like what, cigarette smokers, over, if they look at 20 years, how much they've spent on cigarettes, or how much an alcoholic spent on alcohol. All that money could have been put into something so much more valuable and more of service to them and their families. And you start going back. And again, since I just moved, When you start tossing stuff, all I saw was dollars being like, that's $100, that's $50, and you just start going, wow, look at all the money that was just wasted over the years by not even thinking about it. So can you talk a little bit about that revelation and that story, and what it hopefully will help people listening to kind of focus on what they're buying?
Yeah. I mean, the thing, I feel like the journey of life, right? This journey that we're on. I always like that Ram Dass quote, like we're all just walking each other home, that it's layers of awareness. It's layers of, what do I want in my life? You have 10-year-old daughters. What do I want for them? I want them, I'm just going to make this up. I want them to be able to go to college and not have to get a student loan. Like that's what I want for my kids. I want an education without a student loan. So then if you have that goal, a positive goal, then you can start to look at your acquiring. Well, do I really want $400 pair of Air Jordans, or do I want to put that money in that college account? Like if you start to understand that the consuming and the acquiring and the buying is connected, there's an outcome to it. It has it affects you, instead of just mindlessly like, I want. And if you can attach it to down the road, I always talk about this, and it's in my second book. When I was a senior in college, and I'm not going to get the math right, but our econ teacher, it was the last day of classes, and he put up on the board, he's like, you're going to get offers for credit cards. It's going to happen. You're graduating college. He's like, let's say you get this credit card and you decide that you want to go on a European trip post-graduation, and you charge the whole trip and it's $5,000, and then you don't pay it off. You just pay. So we added up the interest of what that $5,000 was versus on a credit card versus putting it in a savings account and what you would have by the time you were 30. And it was a crazy, you would have saved like, I don't know, you could have saved like, you could have gotten that $5,000 to like, I think it was like $40,000. I, of course, went to Europe and took on that credit card debt and learned. And now at this point in my life, I have these moments where there's something I want to do, or there's something I want to invest in. I'm like, if I'd saved that money. So I just want to take it as a learning lesson. I don't want to beat myself up, but like, okay, so now it's about being thoughtful about those purchases. Is this purchase worth it? Or is there something else I want to invest in for myself and my family?
Now, when you start to declutter your life, this is, again, I'll go back to my experience. I'm an entrepreneur by nature. So I started to sell. And I started to sell things off, and whatever I couldn't sell, I'd donate. Or sometimes I was just like, I don't have the time for this. I'm just going to donate it. So you'd have multiple garage sales. You maybe throw some stuff up on eBay. You maybe throw some stuff on Amazon, and you would sell slowly but surely. One warning I want to give to everyone, especially the collectors out listening, because I know that you've been collecting those baseball cards or those comic books or those vintage toys or lunch boxes or whatever. And you've got this beautiful collection, and you said, one day if I ever need money, I'll sell them. It is so hard to sell collectibles in this world. Unless you do a group, if you sell the collection and then you're going to take a hit on it, which is what happened to me. If I would have sold my comic books individually or by small collections on eBay, I probably would have made 2 to 3 times my money. I would have also have spent thousands of hours.
Yes.
It would have been a full-time job just to make that money. So I sold it as a collection, and I was done with it. And I don't know how much I've spent over the years. I don't know if I broke even or not. I just knew that this is how much money I got back, and I was happy with it. But that was another realization that you think that, I'll just easily sell this, and this. Even if you had first run Spider-Man from the first appearance to the 100, you're going to have to sell one time a piece, and it's going to be a pain, and it's going to take time. It's insane.
Alex, this is so fantastic. This is so fantastic that you have this life lesson. So there's a couple things with this. One, when it comes to selling things, everyone's like, this is worth a lot. And I'm like, okay, well, that's it's worth something to you sentimentally. What it's really worth, if we're going to look at that, is what someone will give you cash for today. So that, maybe people aren't, I help clean out houses after somebody's passed away, and there's all this beautiful furniture that's not in style right now. And they're like, well, they paid a lot for it. It's like, okay, but they also sat at that table every day for 30 years.
Yeah, right.
So, you have to be really, if you're trying to sell things, you have to be very honest about what it's actually worth. Beanie babies, beanie babies, beanie babies, beanie babies, beanie babies, beanie babies, beanie babies.
It's not 1994. It's not 1994 anymore.
No, and just because a company, Beanie Babies, Disney, slaps on the word collectible doesn't mean anybody wants it. So that's a big realization. And then the time factor. Like most people, I have a billable hour. I know how much my time I get paid to do my time. People who have jobs, you can divide by 40. So break down what your time is worth. And it's like, is it worth it for me to take a photo, list the photo on eBay, answer all the questions, take it for the shipping? Like, it's really time consuming.
Returns, customer service, don't even get you started
on all those things. And, look, some people really love it. Some people love to, put it up and they like the interaction. And some people, that money makes a difference in their life. But I just want everybody to understand, like you said, it's just not that easy. One of the things that I've seen pop up in the pandemic, which is fantastic, are these buy nothing groups. Have you seen these? They're on Facebook or different. Nextdoor has them. So people just put something up and they give it away, but it's a way to connect with your neighbors. So like, I don't know. I had a client who, she had, I don't know, it was like they were like trash bags that had a scent that she didn't like. Like she was like, these were expensive and they're good, but I don't like the scent. Just put it up on her thing. I have to send a trash bag. Someone's like, oh, I need them. Put it on our doorstep. Somebody came and got them. So those buy nothing groups are a really great way to connect with your community and give things away.
It's so funny, and I'll put a final point on this section of what we're talking about. I have a very good friend of mine who I went over to his house a couple of years ago, and he was trying to organize his comic books, and they were just literally not organized well. I mean, they weren't bagged, but they were all vintage Silver Age. Anyone listening who understands what I'm talking about, Silver Age Marvel comics. So we're talking first appearance of Spider-Man. I mean, some very valuable, not in greatest of shapes, but valuable. And he's like, what do I do? And I'm talking about, I don't know, probably a good 2,000 comic books, all in that. It's very valuable. But I said, at this kind of collection, you're going to have to get each of these graded. And that's going to cost money to get them graded, because that's the only way you could even try to start reselling them, because there's going to be too many arguments on the grade of it, because now you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars per book. So now there's value in time to that. If you're going to make $200,000-300,000, take a few months and do the job.
Yeah.
No question. But he's a full-time cinematographer. So he's like, I don't have time for this. I don't have, it's not easy. Even when you have things that are valuable, it takes time and effort and energy and headache and stress to get all this stuff out. It's not easy.
And I think the other thing that people need to understand, I just helped some clients whose mother had passed away, and she had a big couch and it was stained and they'd lived on it and they'd done all these things. And we had to trash it. It was really dirty. It wasn't cleanable. It was like sagging in the middle. The kids were like, but this was Liberace's couch. It's worth something. And I was like, first of all, you have no proof that that's true. And not that many people know who Liberace is.
There's no provenance.
Yeah, exactly. And not that many people know who Liberace, and it's also like broken. So people get very hung up. And I think it's this interesting thing of like, oh, well, I spent money on it, ergo it has intrinsic value, so someone else is going to want it. It's like, it's not, National Geographics. I get this question all the time. Well, these are worth something. No, they're not. They were mass produced.
To one person who wants to get into collecting National Geographic magazines might come along and buy the entire collection from you, but they live in Minnesota, you live in LA. There's there's such
you know who they're valuable to? An art teacher. at a local school. They
Give it to
love them. Take the boxes over. They'll cut them up. The kids will do. I mean, that is the greatest joy. Like, what a great life for those magazines to get. And, you know, and I've had this conversation, and I think you're so wise, Alex, to point it out. Like, be really, what something's worth is a very slippery slope. A very, very slippery slope.
If you want to know what things are worth, look them up online and see if there's actual true worth to them. Secondly, go to do a garage sale. That'll tell you right away what something is worth.
But even more than looking them up online, this is what I tell people: look on eBay under sold listings.
Absolutely.
Not under listing cost, sold. Have they sold and at what price? Because I will, those
and
Disney
when.
pins.
And when.
Exactly.
Oh, those Disney pins. Oh, God.
You know, so this is funny. So this is actually clutter block number 7, the stuff I keep paying for. Right. So we're hanging on to things because, this has to be worth something. I can't let it go. I paid so much money for it. And so we hang on to it and it becomes clutter. I always joke, especially during the pandemic, I go into clients' houses and they have giant treadmills in their bedroom. And I'm like, are you using this? And they go, I use it every day to hang my clothes on.
I was about to say that because the dust on it says that you don't use it every day.
And you know, here's like, sometimes we just have to take a moment and go, I made a mistake. I bought something I shouldn't have.
Unless you've got a bar of gold bullion, that's the only thing that doesn't lose its value and you can get rid of it instantly. There's very few, like if it's a collector's gold coin, no one cares. They're going to go, unless maybe a coin, but they're going to go, how much gold is in it? That's all I care about. So that's another thing with collectibles and things like that you might pay for. You've got to find someone who understands the value of it. And that takes time. And eBay is not that place a lot of times.
And also, what's the cost to you for hanging on to it? Right? Like, how much of your house, how much of your, are you fighting with your partner because it's taking over? Like, really step back and kind of get a big eye view of what's really happening. That's what I tell people. They get so like claws in and entrenched and like, I'm not going to let go of this.
Because it's emotional.
Yeah, 1,000%.
It's emotional. So that's why they're fighting. That's why when you see in a hoarding situation, not even the extreme of that, just say, like, if someone have told, like my wife's like saw me carrying these comic books for a decade. She never said a word to me because she understood that there was a lot of emotion attached to it. And there would be a fight if I said anything like, I think it's time for you to let go of those. She was smart enough not to poke that tiger because I wasn't ready yet. But then finally, when I was ready, she's like, are you sure? Like, because she was like, I don't want you to do something that you're going to feel later, like emotionally, like you've lost something. And that's the thing that we do as humans is we really attach ourselves to these things that mean truly nothing unless they have a value to you or provide some sort of value to you while you're living. Clothes, a car, a home. If there's a statue or a beautiful piece of a painting that you enjoy every day while you walk by it, that's great. But at the end of the day, you leave as you came. You leave this world as you came into it, naked and alone.
Exactly. Well, and here's the amazing thing. And I love to put I love that thought process. And what I always tell people is stuff comes to you with no meaning. You imbue all the meaning on it. You give it all the meaning in the world. So you can take the meaning away, right? You can say like, this doesn't affect me anymore. I was doing a speaking engagement and this woman came and she had lost her mother and she was very close to her and it was very difficult for her. And she was very mired in the grief. She just couldn't work through it. And one of the things that she just kind of casually mentioned when she was talking about it, because she was talking about trying to let go of her mother's stuff, is that on the nightstand when her mother had passed, and I got from the talk that it was like hospice for a while and very terrible and all those things. There were a whole bunch of pens on the nightstand that her mom had used to write notes. And so when her mom died, she scooped them up and then she had them on her dresser. And so she was like, every morning when I get dressed, I look at these pens and I'm just reliving the night that she died again. And I was like, oh, like, first of all, let me hug you.
Yes.
And second of all, like, why not flip that? Why not find your most favorite picture of you and your mom that reminds you of the happiest time? Like, why don't we start the day looking at that? Because at the end of the day, the stuff of people who have passed, we don't want the stuff. We want the connection. We don't want to lose that person. So I always encourage people, like, keep the stuff that makes you remember them in the best light and the happiest and fills you with joy, as opposed to like, oh, that was the worst night of my life and I'm going to relive it every morning when I wake up. And so, we have more control than we think we do.
No, there's no question. I have a few items of my grandfather who passed many, many years ago, and I keep them in my office as part of, I see him every day, and it's 2 or 3 things, and I made sure.
And you see them and you smile. And I mean, you just smiled when you talked about him. It's like, oh, that's right. I was so lucky to have him in my life. And you have a little memory. And
so there's not that like you have to you take away everything and you live like a monk. It's not about that. It's about balance and what serves you. I love when you said that serves you. What is serving you? And that is how I look at things now. Anytime I purchase something, I'm like, how is this serving me? What value is this bringing into my life? And I try to be as conscious as I can. And it doesn't always work, but like at Christmas time, my daughters were like, what do you want? I'm like, I don't want anything. I want you two to be nice to each other.
Yeah, don't fight
don't fight over a piece of plastic and then like you're going to gut each other. And then the next moment you're smiling and laughing. You drive me crazy. But I'm like, I don't want anything till I finally broke down. I'm like, I don't know, some hair products. I don't know, something useful, like something I can actually use. Don't get me more t-shirts. I've got freaking enough of them. I don't need, so I've gotten to that place. They're like, we can't buy anything for you. I'm like, good. Then I've done my job.
You know what I want to do? Let's go roller skating in the park together. Let's take a trip.
Let's take a trip. Let's put all our money together and let's go for a trip. And we actually do that now with our daughters. Every year we give them the option, like you could have a birthday party with your friends, or we can go away as a family on a trip. And you can either have that experience of 2 or 3 days somewhere, going to SeaWorld, going to Disney, going on a trip somewhere in the country, or you can spend 2 hours rollerblading, playing some video games, jumping in a house, and a cake. Up to you. And they have started to learn the difference. Maybe and it's because we know how much it costs to throw a darn birthday party.
Yeah. But this is such a great, especially on the other side of, or as we're hopefully getting on the other side of the pandemic, let's do experiences. I want to see my friends. My best friend just had a birthday and we went up there at Christmas and I hadn't seen her in a year. And this is someone I would see every couple months in San Francisco. And she was like, will you just come and help me go through my closet? And I was like, of course. And she was like, let me pay you. I know this is your job. And I'm like, no, happy birthday. Like, your birthday's in 2 weeks. Like, happy birthday. I just want to spend time with you. And so I think that we need to really, if we come out of this with anything, this pandemic, it's like, we want that connection. Let's do that. Like, let's not get each other presents. Let's go to dinner. Let's do a weekend. Let's let's spend time, because time's the only thing we can't buy back. You can't get back more time.
No matter how much money in the world you have, Jeff Bezos has the same amount of time as you or I. It doesn't really matter. Now, one other thing I wanted to talk to you about is, let's say we go through this cleanse. We have found the light. We have gotten rid of everything. We are enlightened in the world of clutter and garbage in our life and things, and we only buy things that we really need. And we've done all of this. And then every year it starts to creep back in little by little to the point where it's so slow. It's kind of like the boiling frog in the cold, the water is like, you don't realize it until the water's boiling and you're dead. And then 2, 3, 4 years down the line, you're like, how did I get all this stuff in my closet all of a sudden? Like, you don't even realize. How can you prevent that clutter from creeping back into your life?
It's so great. I literally call that the clutter creep. And again, it's awareness. It's, it's focusing on the positive. So how good did it feel to live without clutter? Like, how less stressful? You come home, you relax, you didn't see piles of paper everywhere. So keep that in mind. And then you have to, clutter's like dieting, right? We all have a cookie, have another cookie, then we buy cake. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, my pants are a little tight. How'd that happen? It's a constant awareness. And so that's the thing with clutter. Like, how much am I bringing in? Am I shopping again? Am I starting to accumulate? And I always like to put I always say, if you can't tidy up a room, get it back together the way you like it in 20 minutes, you have too much stuff in it. So that's a really good litmus test. And then build in a couple spring cleaning. There's a reason we all, we used to do spring cleaning in the fall before the kids go back to school. Put some times in when you reevaluate the whole house and like, is this clutter getting out of control? And is it serving me? And then if you feel like it's really starting to rush back in, what's going on emotionally, right? What's going on emotionally?
It's the equivalent of you eating ice cream out of the jar, and you're like, why did I gain 5 pounds? I don't understand. Because you deep fried some cheesecake. That's why. Yes.
And what did you, but what was going, I know for me that overeating is, it's when things feel out of control. I know what the feelings are, and I know, and it's like when I'm unconsciously eating that, and it's like, oh, instead of like, what, I want to have dessert tonight. That's what I want to do. And when it becomes unconscious, I know that things are out of control in my life. So if you find yourself accumulating again, are you lonely? Is there something missing in your relationship? Are you not connecting with people? Are you not, I always say that, decluttering can be a real act of gratitude. Like when you declutter and you realize, wow, I'm so lucky that like I got all this stuff, and so that if you can use your decluttering as a moment to be grateful for everything that you have, somehow the stuff loses its hold on you.
Now, where can people find out more about what you do, and where can they get this new book and your new one coming out?
Oh, fantastic. So Tracy McCubbin, TracyMcCubbin.com. We have a fantastic clutter block quiz on the website. So you can take the quiz and figure out what your clutter block is. It's really helpful for people. I have a newsletter there. I'm big on Instagram. That's my big social. So it's Tracy_McCubbin. The first book that's out now is Making Space Clutter-Free, the last book on decluttering you'll ever need. And the second book comes out in October. It's called Make Space for Happiness.
Tracy, thank you so much for coming on the show, and also the work that you're doing in helping people declutter their lives. I think this is another kind of pandemic that's going throughout the West.
This one's an epidemic.
Excuse me, not a pandemic. An epidemic that needs help, and you're helping. So I truly appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Alex.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.